And really very thrilled producer's room right now because Dylan is in there, and the Ravens are advancing, and then you've got Colin in there, and the Washington Commanders are advancing too, and then you've got Phil on the phone, and he's just miserable this morning. Good morning,
Steelers.
Good morning, Phil.
Miserable. I'm not, but I think Dylan just hung up on me. I went into this spew about the lack of effort from Pittsburgh, and then I heard she just like, I'm tired of listening to this. But I did tell Colin this. I thought about Colin last night. So I wasn't surprised by the Steeler game. I was surprised by the lack of effort. My best friend is a Washington fan. I don't even know what their nickname is anymore, but a Washington fan. And he has been insufferable. He's always insufferable. So I'm getting blown up from text messages from him with his acceptance. I got a speech for every play about how he knew it was going to happen, whatever. But when it was over, I thought about Colin. So last night I thought, well, at least Colin. Colin is in his mid-20s. I just verified his age. He's never in his fandom lifetime seen Washington win a playoff. So you have to give fans like that credit, because there was nothing. When it was time for him to pick a team, it wasn't as if he just said, here, let me go with the Patriots. They win every Super Bowl. Like these kids today, just, I'll go with the Chiefs. Patrick Mahomes is cool and they win all the Super Bowls. He went with his hometown team and has suffered for his entire life watching that mess. And I'm happy for Colin that Washington seems to be on the rise. Congratulations to Colin.
Well,
however,
he was kind of born
Dylan
into it, though.
That was the most insulting compliment I'd ever heard.
Phil thought he was doing well. Did you hear him? I didn't understand. I really poured my heart into that.
Oh, my God.
I did. I was really thinking about it. I was like, good for Colin.
Yeah, that's what it sounded like.
Bless your heart.
Good for Colin. This team has sucked his whole life.
I was a little surprised. Here comes Dylan, I understand, all garbed up in Lamar Jackson hat and jersey and maybe even bejeweled teeth like Lamar Jackson. And I said, Mr. Modest Dylan. And he comes in just jumping on the phone. Hello, Phil. He's all happy. He's ready to rub it in my face. I'm not taking it. I knew they were going to lose. And I don't even care. They don't even pay my bills. So go Steelers next year.
Let me just say this. Mike Tomlin has to go, okay, first and foremost, because he's the defensive coordinator. Terrell Austin has the title, but it's Tomlin's defense. He's the one that makes the decisions on the defense. He's also the one that makes the overall conservative theme of the offense remain what it is. And he's 18 years in the same job. And there's a reason why board members at charities have to rotate out after so many years, because the ideas get stale, and then you get too kind of insular, and you get too set in your ways, and you're not even going to change anything. It's time for him to go. When you look at the last 5 playoff losses the Steelers have had, they've gotten killed. They've
been embarrassed.
He needs to go. I don't care how many years are left on his extension, and he's back next year. They're going to bring him back next year, and it's going to be the same thing you just saw the last 5 years. He really needs to go to a different team. Because he's played it out in Pittsburgh. Their defensive strategy, and I tell you this as a high school football coach, their defensive strategy on Saturday night as to how to defend the RPO offense of the Ravens, we would not have used in high school. I'm not exaggerating when I tell you that. We wouldn't have used that approach in high school. And he used it in an NFL game and then refused to get out of it for 3 quarters. 3 quarters.
Well,
that's the height of incompetence and stubbornness.
I do not hold myself out as a football coach, but when I'm watching that game with my dear wife, who's a Steeler fan, but she doesn't pay, she kind of pays attention in passing, and she looked up and said, how come they keep tackling the other guy when Lamar Jackson's their best player? And I thought, good point, babe.
It's pretty bold to say, yeah, let's just let Lamar Jackson run the ball. We're fine with that.
It's a brilliant strategy, don't you think? Yeah. Hey, Derrick Henry, when the Ravens signed Derrick Henry, I think a lot of people went, uh-oh, because that changes everything.
Nasty,
and you talk about, is Lamar the NFL MVP? He may or may not be, but Derrick Henry is the Ravens MVP.
He
changes everything.
He ought to cut that trophy in half.
Yeah, because he changes. He gives Lamar something he's never had before, and the Ravens' offense something they've never had before, and he gives the Ravens' defense something to make them better too. Because while he's running all over the field, the defense is sitting on the sideline resting, right?
You have the same thing with the Eagles and Barkley.
Eagles and Barkley. That's interesting. Yeah, and some of the teams left right now are really heavyweights. In the NFC, Detroit and Philadelphia are, I don't know, that's just tough. And then in the AFC, you still have the Chiefs, who they're the kings until someone dethrones them. They're the kings. You got the Bills, and the Bills play the Ravens this weekend. There's some serious heavyweight matchups going on this upcoming weekend. If you're an NFL fan, this is a great weekend coming up.
I'm excited because I haven't seen good football in 5 weeks. So I should see.
I feel like the football was very good. I liked it a lot.
I'm sure
Colin agrees. And I agree. I'm glad something good finally happened to Colin. Right?
Hey, congratulations to both of you guys.
Well, no, in all seriousness.
By the way, whose congratulations, Dylan and Colin, did you enjoy more, mine or Phil's?
I love talking to Phil.
But whose congratulations were more heartfelt?
I don't know.
Phil was just sad, you know.
Do the producer studio need like a 2-minute uninterrupted gloat?
Maybe.
Colin's remained quiet.
Over here, Lamar Jackson.
I know it sounds like a backhanded comment, but I'm giving him. I'm giving Colin a lot of credit
from Colin. It's it's beautiful, beautiful work from the Ravens. This is the year. But Zay Flowers is hurt. That's making me nervous. But
I still don't think the Ravens win the Super Bowl. I think that's going to be Philadelphia this year. Now, I'm never right about these things, but I think Philadelphia is just too strong up front. When the Ravens played Philadelphia, they got bullied in the second half of that game. They did. The Eagles' lines owned the Ravens in that game they played about a month and I guess about 2 months ago.
They did. It's really the only game this year I'd say the Ravens just was like,
that second half, I couldn't believe what I was watching. You know, that was very un-Raven-like. So that's why I think Philadelphia wins the Super Bowl this year. That's my thought at this time, at least anyway. Although Detroit obviously is Detroit. Phil, let's talk money.
Let's do it.
Because we're losing it every second. We're losing more and more of it. I didn't turn the news down.
It's kind of a spillover from Friday. Friday was a terrible day in the markets. We recovered a little bit at the end. And then over the weekend, and we'll go back to Friday here in a second, and then over the weekend we had some commentary from some bankers that spooked us even a little bit more as their projection. And here we go again talking about the Federal Reserve. And I promise, guys, I try to think of something else to talk about or find something else to talk about that doesn't revert back to rates, but that's what's important. And we had said early in the year, as long as we don't start discussing rate increases again, that we're still in a declining interest rate environment. Well, Bank of America, some leaders from Bank of America did utter those words over the weekend, which gives us our heartburn this morning. But Friday, let's go back to 2022 when we started saying that narrative good news is bad news. We had a really good jobs report. And a really good jobs report is an inflationary pressure. It blew out expectations. We were punished for it on Friday. And some of the commentary because of that report over the weekend is causing our pain this morning. But we do have the CPI and the PPI coming this week. I think the PPI is first in January, which is strange. I've never figured out why PPI is first sometimes, but not most of the time. But we get PPI and CPI in midweek. And that's going to be really, really important. Can we get some momentum or stop the bleeding? Because inflation, if we start to see that trickle back up in conjunction with that very healthy jobs report, that could signal that inflation is back on the rise. And as of right now, not the dot plot from the Federal Reserve, because that's said and done. We'll have to wait till they meet again. But as of right now, there's a lot of economists that are saying either one rate cut, not the two that was predicted by the Federal Reserve, one rate cut, a handful have said no rate cut, and a small minority are saying a rate increase. So that's where those red numbers come from this morning.
Well, the run-up since just before the election and then for about 2 weeks after it, Phil, maybe 3 weeks after it, was when I was looking at it, I was going to this isn't going to continue. This is kind of unbridled enthusiasm here. And the Fed governors, I thought the last rate cut was unnecessary because it kind of flew in the face of everything that they'd been talking about leading up to the rate cuts.
It did.
So
it did.
I don't anticipate a whole lot more.
Yeah, I don't either. And unless we start to see some struggles in our economy, and coupled with those inflation readings coming back down, they're still in the high twos. But if they start to trickle back down, and we see some weakness in our job market, that could change the narrative. This rate cut narrative has changed drastically. There's a chart that I'd seen this morning. I should have emailed it to you, but the perception of what our rates would be at the end of 2025, just from October until now, is drastic. I mean, there's a huge increase in what the expectations of what rates would be at the end of the year, based off of banks, based off of financials, and there's some bank earnings, I think, coming out this week as well, and some of their guidelines or what they think will happen with rates. Now, they don't have a decision. They don't play a part in making rate policy, but they are pretty good at predicting what the Federal Reserve, how they read information and what they'll do.
Yeah, Phil, we often say that the market looks ahead as opposed to backward. The Trump administration has two major thrusts they keep saying they're going to do. One is to attack immigration, and the second one is tariffs, both of which, as we've said on this show several times, both could contribute to inflation. Does the Federal Reserve, are they swimming upstream on this? Their control is, I think, fairly small in contrast to the impact of tariffs and immigration.
I think tariffs spook them more pretty badly, and Jerome Powell said that he didn't really factor that in. And I don't know that I believe that. The tariffs, whether you agree with them or not, we have said all along that tariffs are an inflationary pressure, and we did get a bounce last week. I think it was over the weekend, actually, last week when there was some news that came out that said that they may be more surgical with tariffs instead of blanket tariffs. And our markets bounced a little bit, and then, of course, they disputed that was ever said, and then we quickly gave it back. But the tariffs are spooking the Federal Reserve, and not necessarily our markets, but the Federal Reserve, which in turn is spooking our markets. Because if we do have these blanket tariffs, as promised, then that's an inflationary pressure in the midst of us battling inflation. So from that standpoint, and with their blinders on and that standpoint alone, it's not good for our markets because it has that domino impact. Federal Reserve says, hey, we have to slow down because this is an inflationary pressure and we're battling inflation, so therefore we can't cut rates. And if we can't cut rates, that puts pressure on bonds. And there you go with the pressure on bonds. Now borrowing costs are higher for consumers, and they're higher for companies as well. So the anticipation that companies won't make as much money. And that's where it's having an impact on our market.
But if we accept the premise that we're at a silent war with China, the Wall Street Journal had an article over the weekend that tariffs would be particularly damaging to China right now because of their economic situation. But that's not where I want to go, actually. The horror of the last week has been the fires in California. And there's a terrifying article in this morning's Wall Street Journal that so many people in the areas that have been burned out had as much as 80% of their net worth tied up into their home equity that is now burned and in many cases uninsured. And my question to you, and kind of a strategic question as a financial advisor, for people who bought their property, their homes many years ago, they've got a lot of equity that's just sitting there, things that they bought for $200,000 are now worth $800,000. Pick a number; it doesn't really matter. is the lesson of the California fires and the devastation, which is then lost equity. Is there a lesson in there of should people be drawing equity, cash equity out of their homes and investing it in something that is other than their homes?
Our CFP in Series 7 education, it would tell us, both of them would tell us the same thing, that you never borrow in order to invest. Because if you borrow, let's think, especially right now, if you're borrowing money in order to invest, or if you're maintaining debt in order to invest, with a floor that you have to accomplish for that to be a good decision, is that interest. It's a little bit more complicated than this, but is that interest rate that you're paying? So if I said, hey, I've got $400,000 worth of equity in my home, and I'm going to cash some of that out or borrow against it and invest those dollars, well, if I don't get at least over 7%, I've made a terrible, terrible mistake. And now, if I do lose my home, like these poor people in California have, I still owe that money. I have nothing to secure it with, though. So I still owe that money. That money doesn't go away just because my house goes away. So in no world would we suggest to someone to borrow money in order to invest it. We would suggest that you pay off that debt and then invest the debt service payments once that debt is eliminated. But bringing the circle back around to California, because I did want to bring this up, if we remember in early and even still, one of the main components to our inflation battle was insurance and the insurance premiums. So any of us that have insurance and auto insurance and home insurance, go look at your insurance premiums now compared to a few years ago. And it's one of the big items that has driven inflation, and this certainly isn't going to help. I know there's a lot of those homes that aren't insured, or they didn't have the proper insurance to cover them, or maybe it wasn't available, but there are going to be massive insurance claims. There's a lot of people that did have the proper insurance, and there's going to be massive insurance claims, and the premise of insurance is spreading out that risk. So as these insurance companies pay these claims, it's going to make its way back into our insurance premiums. So that's yet another inflationary pressure that we're going to run into because of these fires out in California. But for your question, no, we wouldn't suggest to someone to take out home equity. We would suggest to make sure you see your insurance professional and make daggone sure that you've got the proper insurance for any and all things that could go wrong on your home. So if something like this does happen, although it's still tragic, that you've got the financial means to replace it. Well,
this is part question and part speech, actually, as the safety guy is coming out here, that one of the stories is told in this article, another one I read, that one of the tragedies here is a fellow who lost his insurance because he couldn't afford to cut down, it was $18,000, I think, to cut down the trees that were a fire hazard next to his house. So because he couldn't afford to cut down the trees, he lost his insurance, and then because he didn't have the insurance, and the fires came, because he doesn't have insurance, he's lost everything. So that's the observation part. The speech part of this, for the people who are listening, take a look at your property, folks, and imagine that you're a fire. You want to make sure that it's fine to have stuff around the house. Just make sure there's not a fire path if you live in the woods that comes directly there. If you got cedar trees, particularly cedar trees that are really close to your house, get rid of those if you can. But that's the circumstance. Going back to the guy that can't cut down the trees, it just seems to me, and I could be wrong because I'm not a financial guy. It just seems to me that there comes a point that it's worth borrowing money to take. If you're going to borrow money to build a deck on your house, it makes sense, if you can, to borrow money to make the area around your house safer. I could be wrong. I just want to put that out there.
No.
Phil,
you're not wrong.
Yeah. Going back to the insurance, we've had the insurance companies take a real hit with the hurricanes in Florida and North Carolina. Now we're seeing them take a real hit in California. Will the insurance, as we know it today, survive?
It'll survive because, one, it's mandatory in most cases, auto and home. You've got to have lenders make daggone sure that you've got the proper insurance. Law enforcement make sure you have proper insurance for autos. But and being that most homes do have some sort of loan on them, the mortgage companies ensure that you have insurance. So it's going to survive, but it's going to most likely get much more expensive because of all these tragedies. So they act almost as if in a way of a U.S. government debt. You know, we always say, hey, U.S. government debt is really strong because of the taxing power of the United States to its citizens. Well, it's kind of the same thing with insurance. They have the ability to increase those premiums in order to make up for those losses. So it's just going to get more painful for insurance. And I hate to swing back around to this, but John, when you read, you were telling us about the article. It's a little off topic or backing up some, but you were telling us about the article about the man that had $18,000 worth of trees that needed cut down and he couldn't afford his insurance. And I hate to even say this because of what he's gone through. It sounds to me like he made a bad decision for the home that he had purchased, that he couldn't afford it, period. And if you couldn't afford to protect what was around it, you probably couldn't have afforded the home when he got it. But you were correct, is it does make sense to borrow money to make your home safe and to improve your home. It doesn't make a whole lot of financial sense to borrow money to put at risk or invest just because you've got that debt service, that interest rate that you have to make up for the difference. But yes, insurance will survive. There may be some changes to it. It may be more detailed, but in order for us to, you know, if you live in an area that doesn't have certain types of risk, you may be able to reduce your premium by not having something like covered. But insurance is just going to get more expensive, and it's mandated in most cases that we have it, so there's no way to run from it.
Speaking of being mortgage poor, the 10-year Treasury this morning is at 4.772%, Phil. It was up earlier. It's just actually dropped a little bit lower this morning, but that's still very high considering where it was about a month or two ago. And as I look at the price of oil this morning, I'm seeing $78 a barrel oil once again. None of this bodes well for the economy.
It does not, and it all circles back around, and all paths lead to the interest rates in the Federal Reserve. But it's more inflationary pressure on the consumer, and it's more inflationary pressure not just the consumer, but we think about companies, because companies also have these expenses that they have to factor into as well, as far as their profit margins. And then when their profits struggle, what happens in the stock market? But our gains also struggle as well when the earnings seasons come around.
Phil, what will you do with your weekends during NFL playoffs? Will you watch any of them, or are you boycotting football for a while?
No, I'm going to watch. I'm excited for some of these games. I like the way that the Detroit Lions play, so I'm going to watch them. And secretly, I'm not going to tell my friend Good Butch. I'm not going to tell him. But secretly, I want to see the Commanders do well, because these long-standing fans like Colin deserve it. They've stood by that team through thick and thin, and so it's time now for them to get their comeuppance. I would love to see them perform well. I like how Detroit plays. I like Dan Campbell. I wish Pittsburgh had a Dan Campbell. I'm still going to watch, and I've got plenty of stuff to do on the weekends. And I wasn't shocked at all. The listeners say, "Oh, Phil gets all tore up." I don't really get all torn up over Pittsburgh losing. I just get excited about when they win. But I wasn't looking forward to hearing from Dylan this morning.
Phil, how do we reach you for more information today, sir?
You can reach us at 304-263-4343 or stop by and see us with an appointment at 1270 Winchester Avenue right here in Martinsburg.
Thank you, Phil. Have a great day.
Thank you, guys.